Well, they're the biggest drug dealers in the world.
In Afghanistan as well, with heroin.
Well, this is another psyop. We better be over there to stop this heroin coming out of the region. There was no heroin coming out of the region until we were there.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
the heroin production went up when America took control of Afghanistan.
You've got soldiers coming back saying that they are being employed to protect the poppy fields. Okay, they're saying this. They're not lying. They're telling you the truth. Yeah. It's just whether like we said before, it's not about facts. It's about public perception.
All right then, Neil. Well, we're going to take another break, and after the break, we're going to come on to the Manchurian candidates. Don't go away. We are talking with Neil Saunders, who is a researcher of mind control. Now, we mentioned John Lennon, and we all know he was killed by sort of a lone gunman.
Yeah,
he was a highly influential man who was part of popular culture. So you believe Lennon was shot by a Manchurian candidate. Could you just explain first what a Manchurian candidate is?
A Manchurian candidate, it comes from the film Manchurian Candidate, but it also comes from sort of Eastern, Korean, Chinese, Manchurian mind control techniques, and it's sort of an amalgamation. It's not strictly accurate. What it would basically means is a mind-controlled assassin, somebody that either does or does not know that they're doing it, and basically a trained assassin. And we know that these exist because basically, like we spoke about on the previous show, Thomas Narut and various other J.G. Watkins talked about the fact that these people can be made, these people can be manufactured, and they can be made to go against their moral codes and
to kill people.
Absolutely.
Manchurian candidates, am I right in thinking that they often terminate their own lives?
Yes. Well, basically, as I say, Michael Tsarion has actually done a lot of that, and it sort of adds credence to the idea. You've got these people that are going off and performing acts that, for whatever reason, they've got quite a lot of meaning to them, but then they never want anybody to find out what this meaning is. They'll just kill themselves in the woods, or they'll kill themselves just before the police come in. The police will sit around for hours on end, not interfering, and then the person kills themselves.
Right. So how would someone be programmed to be a Manchurian candidate? Well, would they be hypnotized, or what?
You could. I mean, there's various techniques, as we've discussed. There's harmonics, which is sort of subliminal, oral things like that. There's hypnotism. There's electroshock and stuff like that. Usually, a lot of these lone nuts you'll find have spent quite a lot of time in military hospitals and such like that. Right. They've very possibly been in the military themselves. People like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer, people like that. They've got intimate connections to the military. They were in the military. Timothy McVeigh, obviously, Lee Harvey Oswald.
So they've been programmed at some point.
Yeah, it's certainly
So what
possible.
about the Lenin killer then? Why do you think that he would be a Manchurian?
Well, I mean, himself, he spent a lot of time in sort of Waikiki Hospital, mental hospital, which is the known MK Ultra sort of testing ground. He had suspicious connections with certain people that would come in and out of his lives that may or may not have been MI5. He was often basically found to have quite a lot of accessible cash, no real sort of money. And you find this, basically, they're allowed to move around without any sort of real problems.
And of course, John Lennon was a thorn in the side for the establishment in America at the time he was shot, wasn't he? Because he was getting involved with certain black activists.
Well, yeah, aside from the fact that he was getting involved in the sort of Black Panther movements, equality.
And he had a huge following.
He had a huge following.
One of the biggest sort of artists of the century, really, wasn't
the
it?
CIA took him very, very seriously. If you read Mind Control, World Control by Jim Keith, he's got an entire chapter that talks about this. He was seen as one of the people that could channel dissent. He was seen as one of the people that basically could cause an uprising. And essentially at the time it was about the Vietnam War. I think he had the idea that it was, I mean, aside from anything, it was a lie. We weren't supposed to be there. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was made up and such like that. Again, mind control. And he was definitely a thorn in the side. He was followed, he was arrested, his phone was tapped. It was made very clear to him on a number of times that basically, no, you are causing problems and you are being monitored.
Right, and what about other more up-to-date, let's talk about the Kennedy assassinations.
Well, Sirhan, it's unbeknownst to a lot of people.
So who was that? Sorry, what was that name?
Sirhan is the person that was allegedly to have killed
Bobby Kennedy.
Bobby Kennedy, yeah. I mean, it was a physical impossibility for him to do it because there was something like 12 bullets fired. Basically, there were more bullets fired than were held in his gun.
Right.
He himself says that he can't remember doing it. He did it without thinking, and at least 3 psychiatrists, Dr. John Heiss, Dr. Herbert Spiegel, and several others, concluded that Sirhan was under some sort of hypnotic induction in a trance state, and he didn't know what he was doing. When he was arrested, I mean, he's a very tiny guy, a very slight guy. It took about 10 guys to wrestle him to the floor because somehow he had this sort of superhuman strength. And a similar thing happened with Mark Chapman, basically. Mark Chapman stood, after shooting Lennon, stood there reading The Catcher in the Rye, which a lot of people have suggested is his trigger. This is the thing that triggers his alternate killer personality.
Because that's the key thing in hypnosis, isn't it, in control, is a word which will trigger that person into...
Interestingly, Mark Chapman was reading A Catcher in the Rye. John Hinckley, after he tried to assassinate President Reagan, was stood there reading A Catcher in the Rye.
Right.
John Hinckley, his family was intimately connected with the Bush family. Neil Bush was having dinner with John Hinckley's father at the very same time that John Hinckley was trying to kill his boss, the president.
Right. Now, what about serial killers? Because you believe that there are several serial killers who have been convicted that we all know about that were in fact Manchurians.
Yes, yes.
Who would they be then?
Well, people like Henry Lee Lucas, Ted Bundy very possibly, David Berkowitz. Charles Manson certainly incorporated mind control techniques. I mean, if you look at the way that the power that he had over his cult, that is, how did a 33-year-old man that's not been out of prison more than 5 years in his entire life learn these incredible induction techniques?
Right.
The other thing is you've got to realise about these Henry Lee Lucas, Charles Manson, if you look at their lifestyle, it's the quintessential MK Ultra trauma-based, you know, they were sent to school dressed as women, they were constantly raped as a child, they were traumatized and this sort of thing. The use of LSD, particularly in the Charles Manson cult and stuff like that. And what you'll find a lot of the time is that these killings, there's a lot more to it than, I mean, let's just look at Roman Polanski for a start, okay? Sirhan was a friend of Roman Polanski, coincidence. Bobby Kennedy was at Roman Polanski's house the day before he was shot. I'm sure that's a coincidence. Sharon Tate was a friend of Charles Manson. She'd been seen going to the ranch which was owned by a film company. You know, Charles Manson was friends with Neil Young. He was friends with the Beach Boys. He was an influential figure in this Haight-Ashbury, and mysteriously he arrived there at exactly the same time that all these other people did.
Right.
You know.
Right, we'll come a little bit more up to date now, and I'll just mention a few perhaps UK cases that possibly may have been mind control candidates. And one would be Dunblane, where many people believe that, was it Hamilton?
Thomas Hamilton.
Thomas Hamilton was possibly mind controlled, and that a possible motive for his, you know, killing all of those innocent children was that those children were possibly part of it being abused by paedophiles.
Yeah, paedophile sex ring.
In an establishment paedophile ring, and had been starting to tell their teacher what was going on. Yeah. And that was why he was programmed, you know, to do that. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it's certainly possible. I think it's very, very similar to the McMartin preschool trial case in America, where basically, you know, again, people are coming in and saying, oh, these poor children, they've got false memories, they're making it up. And it's not true. Basically, there were tunnels underneath the McMartin preschool that led to satanic ritual sites. They found the skinned body of a baby underneath this site, and they found receipts that proved that these tunnels had been filled in. Like, there are connections, and there are connections to mind control. This is like what we were talking about earlier. These children can be used and sold in basically the white slave trade. They can be used in satanic ritual. Yes. They can be used to turn into MK Ultra, and they can be used for blackmail.
So we've come back to the connection between children and mind control, haven't we?
Yeah.
Which, you know...
The thing about the Thomas Hamilton case is that you've got to look at all the officials that basically swept in and caused the investigation to sort of tie up very, very quickly. I mean, I think you're right. I think it is to do with the sort of paedophile case. A lot of people were saying, oh, this is just a very easy way to control guns and, you know, get handguns out of the English, which is very true as well, you know. But again, with a lot of these serial killers, you find that you've got 1 or 2 hits, assassinations for a specific reason, and they muddy the waters by attaching other killings to them.
So the Manchurian candidate might kill 10 people, and there's 1 or 2 of them is the ones they wanted rid of, and because they've killed so many people, no one can see a motive. Yeah,
and David Berkowitz, for a start, okay, one of those people was killed because it was a connection to one of the sort of Sam killings was because she found out about a cult. One was because they burned a Hollywood producer over cocaine, and so he was killed as a response. And the very first killing was to be filmed and distributed for snuff purposes. You know, and again, all these things intertwine, and then you've got certain other killings around there that muddy the waters.
There's always far more to these mass killings than people realise. I am 100% sure of that. And I was on a plane when you know, the Derek Bird incident happened, and we were sitting next to some people, and I overheard a conversation. The guy was reading the Daily Mail or something like that, and he said,
informed. He
tapped his mate on the shoulder, and he said, "Oh, you know what the real motive was, don't you? You know what the reason was? The guy was upset about his will."
Yeah, that
was it. You know, and I thought, how naive, right? Because I believe that in that case, I think he was most likely a Manchurian candidate.
I think it's certainly possible.
And I looked at the victims, and one of the victims, the second person killed, was Kevin Commons, the guy's solicitor.
Yes.
And I don't think he would have been administering Derek Bird's will, because there was several officers he had. He owned the whole solicitor's practice.
Yeah.
But he was in the process of legal action against United Utilities, who were responsible, or allegedly responsible, for the floods which took place in Cumbria, in which one man died.
Yeah.
Now, he believed, Kevin Commons, that they were responsible for those floods because they hadn't managed the level of a reservoir correctly. Now, I'm digressing a bit here, but what I'm saying is there's a clear motive by a very large company that has connections to possibly get rid of that solicitor.
Oh, yeah.
And nobody's looked at that.
No, why would you? Because we've been presented with this very, very, very sort of neat, like with 9/11, doesn't quite make sense, but it's neat enough, it's Hollywood enough for us to say we've got a start, we've got a finish, we've got a middle, and that satisfies all, because most people aren't interested in it. Most people, why would they want to go out and start investigating these things? I've got products to buy. I'm far too busy to be investigating all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And that's the tragedy.
Yeah, I need to watch Skating on Shite tonight. Okay then, Neil, thank you very much indeed for coming on board. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And hopefully we're going to have a few pints now.
Yes, lovely.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
In this show, Neil Sanders talked about mind control. In the previous one, which you can watch again from the richplanet.net website, he described physical techniques to control subjects' minds and effectively program them for specific purposes. These techniques to directly control a mind include psychotronics, whereby very small, remotely controlled devices called implants are inserted into the brain and can make the person do whatever the implant is telling them. Other techniques include control by microwave radiation, extra-low frequency radiation, and also drugs, and of course, hypnosis. My interviews with Neil Sanders were well timed, because a TV documentary entitled Madness in the Fast Lane, screened recently on BBC, telling the story of two Swedish women, could well be describing the effects of both direct mind control of the women and indirect mind control of the population, with the production of the documentary itself. I will briefly describe what happens in the documentary, but recommend you watch Madness in the Fast Lane from the BBC website. It is not often I point people to this propagandist website, but it is necessary to watch this so that viewers understand what is most likely going on here, which is certainly not what was put forward in the documentary. I will briefly describe the story. In May 2008, the two Swedish women were seen on traffic CCTV walking up the central reservation of a motorway in the UK. Both of them then start running out in front of oncoming motorway traffic. A police car nearby, which just so happened to have a BBC film crew in it, attended the scene. When they got there, the women were on the hard shoulder, apparently in perfect health. Suddenly, one of the women runs out into the motorway, seemingly under the wheels of a speeding lorry, although it is clear that many frames were removed from the footage, so we do not really see the lorry doing any damage. The police try to stop her, but she pulls away from them and into the road. Shortly after this, the second woman does exactly the same. Again, frames are removed from the BBC film, and she is seen lying in the middle of the road. The police then attend to what they expect could be 2 fatalities. One of the women then gets up off her feet, removes her jacket, and starts having a fight with one of the cops. The other woman then also tries to get up and shouts out, "They will take your organs." The documentary states that the women are 41-year-old identical twins and are Swedish. After the police eventually deal with the situation and the women are let out of custody, one of them goes on to murder an ex-RAF serviceman who she meets in a street and then later stabs him to death at his home with a knife. She walks away from the attack, hitting herself repeatedly over the head with a hammer. She is currently serving a sentence for murder. Towards the end of the documentary, a professor appears who explains to the audience the 2 different explanations put forward by the defense and prosecution when trying to explain the psychology of the Swedish women. The defense and prosecution allegedly tried to explain the bizarre behavior in 2 different ways, but both were suggesting that the women were suffering from some sort of rare psychological condition. One of these conditions was that the psychosis was contagious, and one woman caught the condition off her sister, which is why they both ran out into the road. At no point in the film did they even consider that the women were under some kind of mind control, which, when you look at the evidence presented by this film, is by far the most likely explanation in our view. So what then might be the point of such a documentary, which was very in your face, look at this? Miles Johnston, who has researched and interviewed victims of secret mind control programs, may have some of the answers. He believes, from people he has interviewed, that there are a range of very sinister projects being undertaken in secret underground facilities